Okay, everybody. I think we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to Sprout School, week 10. Tonight, we are going to be chatting about Junior Master Gardener, this training that Jenny and I have been to today, and we're so excited to share more about that with you all. And then we are going to talk a little bit about community connections in farm to school work and highlight a few communities across West Virginia that are working with classrooms to do really cool farm to school projects. But before we get there, I so loved last week at the beginning when we got, or I guess last Sprout School session, when we got the chance to share people's favorite field trips. And on the flip side of that, I was wondering what if you can remember a favorite guest speaker, like someone who came to your school and talked about a particular topic at any grade level because I know several of us go into schools pretty regularly, and so I was wondering something that made an impression. And it started with thinking about somebody from the community coming into the school to give a presentation. But my example of my favorite guest speaker, kind of community connected. I'll just tell you all who you're looking at on this slide. This is Gino Seegers, who played a character in the Disney Channel show that ran from 2010 to 2013 called Pair of Kings. Super obscure. And honestly, not one of my favorites. But one of the stars of this show was Mitchell Musso, who was in the Hannah Montana, which I was crazy about. So anyway, it turns out that Gino grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is where I went to elementary school. And as an adult, you think about these questions like, oh, did he just volunteer to come to the school or did they pay him to come speak? The answers to these questions, I don't know. All I know is that we got called to the gym one day for a special speaker. We had no idea what it was going to be. And then it was the celebrity from Disney Channel, which was huge. And his whole talk was about following your dreams, and he'd gone out to LA and like many actors got to start doing commercials and just pretty much doing anything that he could to get his foot in the door, and then ultimately ended up on this TV show that made him a very popular guest for a bunch of 7 to 12-year-olds. Um, so anyway, in reflecting on that, I'm like, wow, that's tough because my favorite guest was a celebrity. So maybe I need to work on growing my celebrity. Um, our coworker Casey's been talking about making educational TikToks. So maybe that's the secret to growing my celebrity and being a favorite guest of a elementary schooler one day. Anyway, I'll stop sharing my screen to hear other people's stories if they want to share. Yeah, I just had to show you all this slide because I found a picture of Gino online. I had not thought about him in a long time. Okay, I'll just call on folks in the order they appear on my screen. Jenny, you are up first.
This is an easy one because he's from West Virginia and he's from the county next to where I grew up. So Chuck Yeager, who broke the sound barrier, was actually the grandfather of a girl that I graduated from high school with. And so he like
Oh,
came 400 times to my classes growing up, and it was the best. He always brought different science experiments and told us all about how ridiculous the space program was because he was not selected as an astronaut and all kinds of fun stories. I think most notably in 10th grade, he let us all build like not the little model rockets, but the giant ones that you actually had to have a license to set off. So that was I got to build a rocket taller than me, and that's what stuck with me.
whoa. So did he work with you all to set off the
Oh
rockets?
yeah, oh yeah. They
Wow.
he had to get clearance because George Washington High School is too close to Yeager Airport because it's only about 3 miles of airspace difference. He had to get clearance from the FAA and the airport. Like it was a wild experience that I would love to repeat somewhere. But have yet to figure out the students that I would trust to do that. Maybe the Linwood kids. I could see a Mia and Anna and their friends being okay. And Pocahontas County is far enough away from everything. I think we could do it.
I think that would be really cool. I want to be there if it happens. Okay, we'll go to you next, Noelle.
Wow, I can't beat Chuck Yeager. Really? No, I think one of my favorites was the zoo guy. And I think everybody had a zoo guy come to visit at some point and bring like different animals and stuff. Um, but yeah, I loved seeing different animals and the zoo. I don't even remember what animals he brought to our school, but yeah, I love the zoo guy.
Amazing. And Daryl, I remember you sharing last time that the zoo was your favorite field trip. Did you have a zoo guy that also came to your school? I think you're still on mute. Yeah. Oh, no. Okay. Well, we'll give Daryl a second to work on your audio. Yeah, perfect. And then Danielle will jump to you next if you remember any memorable speakers.
Um, I can barely remember my teachers' names, let alone a guest speaker, but I did have a really cool speaker that I sat in. I had the honor to sit and listen to during a work event, if that if that counts.
Oh, absolutely.
Um, so we did during one of our conferences that we went to, we had Captain Sully, the guy who landed the plane in the river, if you guys remember him. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got to meet him. We got to listen to his story. He gave a beautiful inspirational speech. It was amazing. It was definitely an honor to be able to even see him because you know how lucky it was that he was even with us to tell the story. So that was my favorite guest speaker to date.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, what an inspirational story. That's amazing that you got to
Oh
hear.
my gosh, yes, it was definitely just wild. I mean, you hear about it on the news, but to hear it firsthand is just absolutely just crazy.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Okay.
can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I had to come in on my phone. I don't know why. My Bluetooth wasn't working. My mic isn't working on my laptop, and I've never had a problem before. But I rarely go into Zoom meetings. So to answer your question, there are two actually. When I was teaching high school, we had guest speakers come in that had nothing to do with what I was teaching, and one of them was a dentist. And what he taught me about health, oral health care. I'm 65. I have never had a cavity in my life.
Wow.
And I credit him with that, how to take care of my teeth properly. My love of animals, science, anything like that. When I was in junior high, I was picked to go to a science symposium, and the speaker was Otto von Braun, who developed rockets. And I wanted to be a science teacher when I went to college to be for education, a degree. And a friend of mine convinced me that if I ever wanted to get out of teaching, simply having a teaching degree in science was probably not going to get me a job. And he convinced me to change to business ed. And so I changed to business ed because if I ever got tired of teaching, I could very easily go into any company with my business degree and probably find a job where it would be more difficult with science without an advanced degree in science of some kind.
Wow. And then did you end up teaching science classes or business classes?
I was a business ed teacher
Yeah.
and I got tired of it. I got tired of being a babysitter in the high school. I lasted about 3 years. And then I went to work for a company that taught me project management
Mm.
and eventually ended up at George Washington University for a bit and then Stanford.
Wow.
And when I got tired of teaching at Stanford, same classes every year, I went to work for an oil company and I now teach project management in the oil equipment manufacturing environment.
Wow. Yeah.
And have 40 days left.
You're so close. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's
No,
fantastic.
so close to retirement. So close to retirement.
So close to retirement. Yep. And
And yes, I am counting the days.
my neighbor is a retired principal. And for the first 1,000 days after she retired, she kept count. You could text her and be like, "What day of retirement is it?" And she knew. And then I think now she's past 1,000 days. I don't think she's tracking it anymore. But I haven't asked her in a while, so I'll have to check in and see if she still knows.
I have a countdown on my computer that tells me exactly how many hours to noon on April 4th that I have to go.
Yay. Yeah. What a career. And it's amazing to see how the business education has taken you down yeah, really interesting path.
Yeah, in the end, it was education that drove my entire career.
Yeah. Well, you're in
It
good
was
company
one of
here.
the best decisions I ever made. Yep.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Lots of big fans of education. And speaking of education and sharing stories, that was a big focus of the training that we attended today. So we'll jump back into our slides. So this is a day and a half long training. It's organized by Junior Master Gardener. Tomorrow, there are a couple of different tracks that you can take. One, school garden success stories. Another one is all about their curriculum. And just as a reminder, we talked about at the beginning of the year, we talked about Junior Master Gardener because they have a couple of different curriculums that are fantastic, centered around garden based learning. I know Extension Noel often works with Learn, Go, Eat, Grow. They've got one for middle school that's Operation Thorn and Operation Water. They've adapted Learn, Go, Eat, Grow for early elementary schoolers. So they're just all about cool ways to do hands-on learning and yeah, get kids thinking about the planet and growing their food and where local food comes from, all those good things. So, the schedule of speakers today, our first speaker was probably my favorite from the day, although all of the speakers were fantastic. And we got to hear from Dr. Jay Maddock. And Dr. Maddock is a professor in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health at the University of Houston. Is that right? Do you remember? Yeah, I think that's right. And then he's also the director of the Center for Health and Nature. Um, and he started his career doing public health research. And, in the world of public health, he was saying today, you often talk about the challenges that we are facing as Americans: rising rates of obesity, rising rates of stress, rising rates of anxiety amongst kids, and rising ADHD. And he was, just thinking about, well, what what are some ways that we can combat these different challenges, and went to a conference and was really inspired by this talk from a woman who worked on a trail network in South Korea. And it just seemed like all the people at this trail conference were really happy, and many of them spent the majority of their day outside. So he was like, maybe there's some connection there between this nature thing and happiness. And so his presentation was highlighting a bunch of scientific studies discussing how nature benefits different parts of, yeah, our health. And so you can see 4 studies highlighted on this slide. As he got to the end of his presentation, he was talking about nature prescriptions and how much nature is good for us. And generally, this is what the studies recommend, although this research is still evolving. And he made a point to say that it'll be interesting to, as we learn more, to see what the prescriptions for nature access looks like. So, yeah, I thought he did a terrific presentation. I got to take a class in college called ecotherapy that followed a similar format to today's presentation from Dr. Maddock, where on Tuesdays we read studies that talked about the different benefits of nature to human health, and horticultural therapy, nature art therapy, forest bathing, being in a greenhouse, just owning a house plant, all these different ways that you can interact with nature and how it helps us as humans. And then on Thursdays for that class, we got to do a practicum, which was amazing. This was senior spring for me, and I was working on my honors thesis and very busy. So for this Thursday class, we got to canoe and forest bathe and all the do nature art, all those things I just talked about. And it was a fantastic just break in a busy semester, and cemented for me the importance of nature to wellness. And it makes me really happy that that idea is backed by scientific literature as well. And that was what Dr. Maddock was highlighting today. So being outside is good. What are some of the ways that schools are getting kiddos outside? We got the opportunity to see examples from schools across the world, which was amazing. They expanded it on an international scale. So we started in Minnesota, and we saw this expansive school garden. It's currently covered in snow, but they have a greenhouse as well with a ginormous tomato and lots of very cute kids, very excited about being in the garden. And then, on the theme of cute kids enjoying learning about plants, we went down to Texas and we hung out with a kindergarten class implementing that early childhood learn, go, eat, grow curriculum. And my favorite piece from that presentation is, I had not heard of this activity before today. They have adapted the Addams Family, they've adopted that song to be the parts of a plant, and all the kindergartners were performing the parts of a plant, and it just made my heart so happy. And then we went over to Kyrgyzstan, which is in Central Asia. And I learned today from our speaker that in Kyrgyzstan, the local residents sometimes describe it as the Switzerland of Central Asia, because the topography there is very mountainous. So there are limited opportunities to find spaces to grow things, and there are, yeah, limited amount of agricultural backgrounds within families. So there was this big push for a junior master gardener to partner with the folks in Kyrgyzstan to adapt their curriculum and translate it Russia, um, into Russian, so that the lessons could be utilized by the kids there. And we learned the stat today that there are 31 schools and 1,700 kids that are utilizing this curriculum, which I just think is super cool. Because it speaks to, we're doing these activities here in West Virginia, and then they're also doing them on the other side of the world. And then the last speaker today was kind of perfectly transitions into what we're talking about tonight, which is community connections and farm to school work. And our speaker was Beth Wiggins, who is a school nutrition director. She worked for a long time in Michigan, and now she's down in Texas. And she was just telling lots of stories of working in community to get school gardens started. And I pulled out this slide from her presentation because it these 4 steps of like how to plan a strategy for collaboration are what we're doing through the learning labs for Sprout School. So I thought it was really cool that they had these same ideas in practice in Texas as we have here in West Virginia. And she told, like I said, many stories, but one of my favorite stories was she had a school garden, and there was a community member who was actually selling collard greens from the school garden. He was harvesting them and selling them, and someone came to her and said, isn't this like not what the garden's supposed to be used for? Aren't these resources going to the students? And she's like, oh, let me talk to this guy. And Detroit, Michigan was hit really hard with the decline in manufacturing in the United States. And this man had lost his job and loved coming to the garden because it gave him a sense of purpose. And, the team ended up building a relationship with this guy, and he put okra in the garden and he expanded their production tenfold. And it turned out to just be a really beautiful connection. And yeah, thought that was just such a great story of sometimes you don't know, yeah, what to expect going into developing relationships with other folks, and then they can turn out to, yeah, be really beautiful. So, talking about building beautiful connections with folks, we will jump into some West Virginia examples. And I know Noelle's here. We're always talking about Fayette County because Fayette County is doing such cool work with farm to school initiatives. So, last summer, New Roots Community Farm and their partner Fayette County Schools got a $598,000 grant. Yeah, that's right, from the Chef Ann Foundation to increase scratch cooking and increase local procurement in Fayette County schools. And the Chef Ann Foundation is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to those purposes, broadly helping schools take action so that every kid can have access to fresh and healthy food. So, to help with increase that scratch cooking, they're going to have an on-site chef consultant, and it's really cool that we have this example. And then our next Sprout School session on March 4th, we're going to be talking to Andy Pence, who is the school nutrition director in Fayette County and has done a lot of local sourcing work. And he came to speak to our group last year. And one of my key takeaways from his presentation is, I assumed as a layperson that students would be your toughest critics when you're trying to introduce new farm to school meals. But what Andy was saying is that it's really that you need that buy-in from the school cooks because it's extra work for them to do that scratch cooking, to use ingredients that they might not be as familiar with or that aren't prepped quite as efficiently as the ones that might be sourced from elsewhere. So Andy has worked really hard to get that buy-in from school cooks, and I'll let him share stories about that next week. But this grant is a neat way to build off of that work that he's already done. And I'll pause here because I meant to, at the end of our recap of the day, go to Jenny and see if she had anything else that she wanted to share from reflections on the day of.
No, I think I can't cheerlead Betty Wiggins enough. When she was at Detroit Public Schools, she's who taught me how to work with child nutrition directors. She's literally who taught me how to like not tear my hair out on a
Wow.
daily basis. I met her at one of the youth garden symposiums, and she is, if you Google her and email her, she will respond. You can be some like rando on the street and she will totally respond to you if you're excited about getting kids excited about either healthy food or gardening or any of the above. I think the first presentation with the importance of nature actually Margaret and I were texting each other during the whole thing because we were so excited about it. And what I really liked was that his background is actually in psychology. He doesn't have a public health background. He doesn't have a background in nutrition. He has none of that, but what he does have a background in is changing behaviors. And so he just had this really interesting way to frame everything, and he was so no nonsense. I like messaged our state director for Farm to School and said this guy should be the keynote, because it was so down to earth and so just like here's the statistics, here's the research to back it up, and here's a story. And that was really really powerful. And it really tell the data with stories is kind of what totally sunk home, like was home for me there. And then I've known the JMG folks for years, so for me it wasn't like quite the highlight. I think it was that Margaret for like all of the places because I've seen them all before. Um, but I will say we did get to see, right? So they show these beautiful, wonderful gardens and they show these beautiful, wonderful field trip opportunities. It was interesting to see one that was clearly not designed by the people who were going to have to use it, which was the Minnesota example, right? So they had these giant 11-foot by 11-foot concrete beds that they were planting in. And I don't know about you guys, but 11 feet's a little more than I can reach, which means it's a lot more than a preschooler can reach. And so just listening to him talk, like their garden director and their basically their environmental science kind of specialist talk about what they had to do in order to because they were already there, right? He inherited them. They were built when the school was built. They were kind of probably built as landscape beds, is what I kind of feel like they probably were. And he said, we're going to change it to something else. And also now we need stools and we need this and we need long range handles. And so just listening to him, it reminded me so much of some of the like things that I know folks in West Virginia have inherited. And it's like, oh, everybody has to do this. It could be $1 million school garden project, and somehow you're still gonna need a stool or some duct tape or something. So it kind of I think rooted a lot of that. And then the Kazakhstan program is just mind blowing to me. Junior Master Gardener does a really good job. So they're based out of Texas A&M. I know we've talked about them before, but I think one of the things that they do a really, really good job of is they don't talk about it as gaining STEM skills. They don't talk about it as gaining childhood nutrition. They don't talk about it in any of this knowledge gain. They talk about growing good kids,
Yeah.
literally, and they talk about growing leadership. And that's how they frame everything. And the byproduct of their program is that, oh yeah, you just happen to have a kid who wants to go into agriculture, but what that kid really is a leader in their community and solving their community problems. Um, and I think that's one of the takeaways whenever Lisa gives that little like spiel is, we're not here to solve all of the nutrition issues of West Virginia, but if we grow some kids who will take that on, then we've done our jobs.
Yeah.
In so many ways. We're not here to, we're not the ones serving the school meals. We're not the ones that are like mm, generally day in, day out with the kids all day long. But if what we do is inspire them to become those people, then we've done something right.
Yeah. I love all the metaphors that they work with. Growing good
Oh yeah,
kids,
they're great with puns. They
plant
love the puns.
seed. Yeah. They do it all so well. Well, the next example of oh, I actually, when you were thinking about $1 million like farm to school projects, the university I went to, William and Mary, paid to have a really nice greenhouse installed on the roof of the science center. But this greenhouse was not designed by gardeners. And so the floors are not slanted at all. They're totally flat. And as you all know, if you've ever worked in a greenhouse, when you water plants, then you need them like the water to flow into a drain. Otherwise, it just piles up on the floor. And so they put in the state of the art greenhouse. The heating system is amazing, but the water like drainage system didn't work super well. But you know what? We ordered a bunch of squeegees and we all worked together and it works out. But yeah, it is interesting how those stories tend to come up in smaller projects and even the bigger projects, as you said, Jenny. Um, but yeah, but then our next example of farm to school and community connections comes from Jenny as well, and some of the really
Oh.
cool work that she did in Huntington and Charleston.
Oh yeah. Okay, so
Hmm.
this is like what happens when something is 10 years old, it comes back around, and I found myself guiding this work again, um, in a different way, but a really special way. So in 2015, I I worked for West Virginia State Extension. I was our state JMG coordinator. I was like, yes, we're gonna go do all the things in all the places. My mandates were preschool and alternative education juvenile facilities. In a lot of ways, those are the same population. I'm just gonna like put it out there, in so many ways. And so I went into the state of West Virginia. I don't know if you guys know, there are the traditional like juvenile facilities that are overnight facilities where they put kids. And so we worked with a number of those. But then we also worked with the day report centers. And so those are kids that kids that did something wrong but not so serious as to have to like leave their families is kind of the easiest way to describe it. And these kids were transitional, right? So you got them for 6 to 8 weeks and then you said bye to them because they went home or they went, their service was done. No kid was ever supposed to be there more than 18 months. And so you very rarely saw the same kid all the time. A lot of minor stuff, right? Like a lot of minor stuff, a lot of like we took ketchup because we didn't have any ketchup in our house, like a lot of things like that from the grocery store. And so one of the things that we did at the Huntington and the Charleston Juvenile Day Report Centers is we went in and talked with the kids and said, what do you want to do? Here's your boundaries. It has to be something agriculture related because we're ag extension agents. Like we'll toe the line, but that's in our title, so we have to do something. And interestingly enough, they both kind of came up with this idea of we want to do gardens for our community and then we want to like sell whatever is in the garden, right? So basic entrepreneurship. Huntington had had the Scratch project with like little guys for years. And so some of those kids actually ended up in the high school project. And so we took vacant lots and we built I don't know, one of them had 65 raised beds on it. The other one had about 40. Yeah, no, yes, your face says it all. And then we had a high tunnel on the lot in Charleston as well. And so that's the one that had 40 raised beds and a high tunnel with about 25 raised beds in it as well. And so we built full production spaces. And the facility staff were 300% on board with this. And what I will say is when it came down to it, we're like, all right, they learned every week we met and they learned from experts in the field. So similar to what we're doing now, but in person. And so they learned what a CSA was. They learned what it meant to have a farmer's market booth. They learned what it meant to we did the hat activity. We also did the umbrella activity where you build the parts of a plant on an umbrella. So they talked to Shelly Keeney she was at the Wild Ramp then and not Refresh yet. And so they got to meet a bunch of really cool adults. And that was the key. It had nothing to do with what we were learning. It had to do with the fact that they got to meet people who cared about them, and wanted to see them succeed. And I will not cry, I promise, but I'm slightly tearing up. But one of the things that they said, we're not confident. None of us have ever grown anything in our lives. And so we should do a CSA model. Like whatever we get every week is what we get. And I said, great. And then both groups looked at me and were like, how are we going to get this to our people? Like, how are they going to know to show up? And I was like, well, it's your all's community. Like, Fairfield of Huntington. I mean, yes, I live here, but also it's your all's community. How do you want to let people know? And they're like, can we just drive it around on bicycles and like, $10. Their key phrase was like $10 will make your taste buds holler, right? So that was their big, huge thing. And if you were on Snap, you paid $5, but got $10 worth of produce. And if you had a big family, you could pay more and get additional servings. And so they had this whole price structure. And the Charleston crew did similar things. And it was great. It was so much fun. And I think the thing that was really cool is it gave the staff at the juvenile facilities ways to interact with their kids that weren't just like, let's get your homework done, let's do this thing, let's keep you out of trouble. It actually gave them a way to like build relationships and keep them out of trouble. If the kids graduated from the juvenile facility before and they wanted to continue to come back, we paid them. They got paid $15 an hour for everything that they did. And it was really funny because these were my favorite groups of kids to work with, were these guys. Is anybody surprised by this? No. Um, but it gave a lot of them meaningful job experience. And so once they left, or once they decided they were done, or the growing season was over, they were like, oh, I can go get a job and I can use this as a reference. I wrote more reference letters in those 2 years, I think, than I've ever done in my life. And I think the juvenile facility directors also, they were like, nobody's ever asked us for a reference letter before. Like the fact that they managed to like grow their confidence enough to even ask us was cool. And one of the things that a really good story, so on the west side of Charleston, and you'll hear from Darrell later on, and I know Noel's already heard from Darrell, but he was one of our community partners there on the west side of Charleston. One of the things that was really cool is they decided to have an open house day before they started the whole CSA program. And so they decided that they wanted to just like, they didn't have enough for a full CSA, so people could just show up and like take tours of the farm and do all of this. And like one little boy looked, and well, not little, he was probably 6 feet tall, but he looked at me with like tears in his eyes and he was like, I thought they were going to come make fun of us and they're proud of us. And so the fact that like all of these adults in Charleston, like that worked for CPS, that worked for the police force, came over and were just like, yeah, your carrots are cool, probably kept that kid from being like a reoffender. And so really cool, really fun stories. We did an entrepreneurship unit where we made stuff and then sold it at the Winter Blues Festival. Their booth was the highest earning Winter Blues Festival booth that year. They made $3,000 on freaking soap scrub and everything else that they made. So, like all kinds of really cool stuff came out of this. And in Huntington, the Huntington Juvenile Report Facility kind of changed its focus about like I left extension, program continued. A few years later, that facility sort of changed its focus and ended up they cannot run programs the same way that they could before. And it's largely due to the kids that they're getting in and not anything else. That essentially they needed a facility that was like more secure than what we were doing. Like you can't have the kids that are in that facility now biking around Huntington, I guess is the way to put it. But in Charleston, it took a break, but it didn't. So Darrell and the juvenile report facility director kind of continued to like work with the kids and like they continued to grow stuff and sell stuff. Now there is a local grocery store on the west side of Charleston that buys some of that produce, which he will talk about the trials and tribulations of opening up a grocery store, I'm sure, when he talks with you guys. But the really cool thing is the next generation of those kids, so the kids that were in like third, they're not in trouble. Like the kids that were in like third and fourth grade and were like doing some of the youth gardening and like school gardening with Darrell are now 18, 19, 20, and they're like, can we revamp this but not be in trouble to have to do it? And we're like, yeah, absolutely. And so last weekend I like got to sit with 3 or 4 of them last Friday and map out, and Produce Peddlers 2.0 is alive and well. They're going to take it to the senior facilities, and they're going to, instead of taking it to individuals' houses, there's like 5 senior high rises in Charleston. And so they're going to bike to all of those with the vegetables on the trailer. And Jarell and I looked at each other and said, we're not even sure where the trailers are, but we'll find them. And all sorts of things. So here to say, really easy to build community with youth projects, but when you let the youth drive that work, that's when you actually build the community, which is really neat and really fun. And it's a really good way to like watching the confidence of having the kid be able to like be proud of his $20 of vegetables that he grew, right? So like every time they got a 10 or a $20, payment, they got very excited. And at the end of the year when we're like, yeah, you guys made $15,000, they just kind of stared at us, right? Because they'd never imagined that amount of money in their lives. And all kinds of fun stuff. And they got to decide what happened to that money, right? And so they're like, oh, we want to have a pizza, we want to take like, we want to have a pizza party. And I'm like, well, that's like maybe $200 worth, guys. Like, you got to figure out the rest of it. And some of it was they set up scholarships for their friends. Some of it was they wanted to set up a fund for little guys that needed stuff so that they didn't have to, go take things from stores. And so kind of they spread the wealth and really, really, really did a lot of community development work without knowing that's what they were doing.
That's so incredibly cool. Yeah, I love this story. The what's in your everything but the kitchen sink scrub? And then my second question,
Oh,
this photo is small. Is that Heather or somebody else that just kind of looks like?
that is Heather. That
Okay.
is yes. So that is like Heather and I have no. So that's Brad Grit is the dude in the yellow. So
Okay.
that's Grit's farm. So that's when Heather was working at
Right.
Grit's farm.
Right. Heather is our coworker now. And this photo, as Jenny was saying, is from like 10 years ago. And I'm like, wow, that really looks like Heather. I wonder if
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
her.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the everything with the kitchen sink scrub. Yeah, so we basically went in with Epsom salt and all of the like fancy bath oils and then a whole bunch of essential oils. And there
Oh.
was one version of scrub that had literally 5 drops of every essential oil we had. And so this is the name they gave it. Uh, and strangely enough, it was the best seller, and I'm still not sure why, because it had a lot of eucalyptus. It was very strong. But, it was a very boy-friendly scent though. The dudes at the Small Farms Conference bought it because it would scrub the garlic off, the garlic smell and the onion smell off their hands.
Oh, yeah. No, that story of entrepreneurial success is incredibly cool as well. And kind of our next example also connects entrepreneurship and farm to school. It comes from Wheeling, West Virginia. So the Wheeling greenhouse is primarily student led. The teacher that you see in this center slide in the center of this slide leads the CTE program. His name is Donald Headley, and they sell, as you can see, coleus plants. They do pansies. They do eggs. They've got some local chickens from in the ag program now. And what the CTE teacher will say is that like 90% of this work is done by students, and the students staff the greenhouse when it's open. The greenhouse is open Mondays through Fridays, 3 to 6 after school. The community comes by and they buy the different plants, and it's a pretty amazing model because they are at the stage where they make a profit, which is super cool through community support. And then all of that money, just as Jenny was talking about with the program in Huntington, goes back into buying more plants and feeding the work and feeding the buying plants to get food into the schools and paying the student workers. So it's all very, very cool. And then they've also connected with the public market in downtown Wheeling, and their tomatoes are sold at the public market, and you can see those in the photo on the left. They look beautiful. And then they also have connected with local elementary schools to get kids talking about agriculture from a young age. So the high school students will go into the elementary school and they'll read different stories. They call it the Young Farmers and Ranchers Program. Um, and this story is called My Grandpa, My Tree, and Me. And it's a pecan tree. And the little girl is hearing from her grandfather why it's so important to care for this pecan tree. And it was planted on her birthday. So it makes her feel like it's her pecan tree. So, yeah, very sweet story. And in reading the story, then a great connection to the agriculture work that they do at the high school level. And then, of course, big hit, as we were talking about with the zoo visitors, the FFA program also brings animals. So they bring calves, they bring sheep, the the little, yeah, fluffy friends that the elementary schoolers are also excited to see. Okay, so with that, does anybody have any questions about any community connections in farm to school work, the Junior Master Gardener Conference, any stories that anyone wants to share related to community and farm to school connections?
And you guys will hear from Dana eventually. Dana was in the area that got super flooded out, so we're she's a little overwhelmed right now. We're letting her settle.
Yeah, Jenny, how are those folks doing? What's it looking like in McDowell County?
I mean, okay, this is gonna sound ridiculous. It happens so often in McDowell County that like when it happens, the best thing to do is to just give them what they need and feed them. And so that process has started, and yeah, they have all the roads open back up, which I thought was gonna take weeks. But no, never underestimate some out of work coal miners with heavy equipment is kind of the the rule there. I just thought. Um, the schools may not, there was a lot of damage to about half of the schools, similar to the 2001, 2002 floods. And so they may not actually go back in session at all this year. They're trying to answer those questions right now. It's generally, the school system leads the relief effort as far as coordination because they have their eyes on every community and kind of know where the kids are, which means they know where the adults are. I don't know, keep them in your thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Dana was okay. So her house sits a little up on a hill. So she actually was okay and just does not have reliable internet service at home right now. It comes and goes. So I know like when she's texting me, she has it and then she like breaks off for 3 or 4 hours. And so I'm like, yep, there went her internet. So yeah. Um but they're all, I mean, look for the helpers, and McDowell County's full of them already. And there's a whole bunch down there, and there's a whole bunch of us going down this weekend and next weekend. So,
Nice. Have you heard an update on your house?
my house actually only took on water in the basement. So yeah, so fun fact, I used to live in McDowell County, for those of you that don't know. I have not sold my house yet out of there. So there's an AmeriCorps actually living in it. And so he evacuated because Gary completely got ransacked with water, which is the community, not the person. But he evacuated out and then up actually into Fayette County, and then he got back in yesterday and said that it looked like there was about 3 feet of water in the basement, but it never got up into the house. So like that's a win. That's a win.
It's a big win.
Yeah, that's a big win for.
I lived in Houston when Harvey hit,
Okay,
and
yeah,
we only got about 13 inches of water in the house, but the whole downstairs, 4 feet up from the floor, was ripped out,
yeah,
and we're still not done renovating the house in Houston
yeah,
from the floods.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
We'll be thinking of those folks, but I'm so
yep.
glad you're going down to feed the folks.
If anybody wants to come sling soup or grilled cheese, let me know.
Jenny makes
Sure.
some mean grilled cheese. She's an expert.
Yeah, there's so lots of people are like feeding, but there's like one local restaurant, and he goes by Taco Man, but it's really Latin Appalachian that's been feeding kind of all of Welch. So yeah, gonna go sling soup with him and
That's
take him spices because he can't find any of his spices right now. I
and
got the Costco request and it's all spices.
oh, yeah, absolutely. And his food is so good. Jenny took me to McDowell County last December, and we got to stop at Latin Appalachia, and he made the most brilliant infusion of Latin-inspired food and more classic American food. He did apple pie stuffed churros. Oh my gosh, guys, amazing. If you're ever down in McDowell County, you have to go to Latin Appalachia because it's so good. So good. And to end the night, yeah, next session, so 2 weeks from now, Tuesday, March 4th, Andy Pence is coming to chat about local sourcing, as I said earlier, in Fayette County and what a child nutrition director does. And he's fantastic. So I hope you all are able to make it to that session. And also coming up soon, Jenny and I will be at the Small Farms Conference next week. We will be running youth programming for a good chunk of it, but would love to see anyone who will be there. So if you will be there, shoot us a text or send us an email. And then earlier, Jenny referenced this, and I think I don't know if we've mentioned it yet in Sprout School, but coming up in November, there's going to be a farm to school conference. I think we have mentioned it. In that's going to take place in Morgantown. And there's a graphic that a little save the date that we can send out now. Noel forwarded it to me today. Thank you so much for doing that. And we will send everyone that graphic in the follow up email so that you get more information about that conference. Okay. And with that, oh, hi, Sherry. I see that Sherry joined as well. We will say good night and goodbye, and we'll look forward to seeing you all soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.